beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path. What does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? All the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. This week's episode is about positivity, and wow, do we have a lot to say, so it's actually a little longer than usual. After reading a question from a listener who was exploring the merits of being a quote-unquote positive person versus embodying a state of authenticity, we got deeply curious. Given that many spiritual teachers and traditions, and even modern neuroscience, point us towards the wellness benefits of positive states, should we focus our attention on bringing what uplifts us forward? This conversation feels especially timely to us as we enter the holiday season, which can be a time full of high expectations about how happy and grateful we should be. We went to town exploring this topic, covering heavy-hitting questions like, what happens when the idea that we should be positive actually evokes states of shame that inhibit presence and healing? What is the soil for genuine positivity? Can our attachment to being happy decrease our ability to be genuinely positive? If we shift away from always trying to be the positive people, well then how do we show up authentically in relationship with others without adding more stress to the mix? We even tied the episode off with a holiday bow by throwing in some of our tools on how to relate authentically, even when you're in a trauma vortex. If you're enjoying the show, we're so appreciative if you leave a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to get our weekly digest of the resources we're currently loving. We do have some new community experiences coming up in January as well, so now's a good time to get on the newsletter so that you can be updated. One last thing before we head into the conversation, if you're new to the show, is that Brooke and I sometimes can curse, so if you're in mixed company, you may want to pop some headphones in. Okay, here we go. Hello, darling Brooke.
Hello, darling Vanessa.
Well, we have what feels like a juicy conversation today. I'm going to be really interested to see where this goes.
As usual, we have no idea.
No idea. So we had somebody write us a note with what seems like a really interesting question for both of us, but also perhaps aptly timed since we are entering into a holiday season for many of us, which means a time of year where not only will we be around a lot of loved ones, family, friends, coworkers, but we'll also have a lot of expectations around how we hope to feel and what we want to bring to the world. So let me just read this beautiful question that one of our listeners sent in, and we'll kick off the conversation. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Recently, I've been working with a question around positivity, spirituality, and psychology. I'm someone who has grown up with the idea that if you can stay positive, you'll lead a happier life and one that impacts others positively as well. I'm also someone who's received praise for my whole life for being the positive one, for always smiling, and all those kinds of things. And this makes me feel good. Also, I recognize that I myself like to be around positive people, so shouldn't I want to be that too? I definitely know and can recognize that having a positive mindset, looking for silver linings, showing gratitude, are all beneficial and healthy practices. However, recently I've been feeling a call to be more authentic to how I'm really feeling, to show anger when I feel anger, to be sad when I am sad, to hide those harder emotions less and be more true to what I'm feeling, to answer more honestly when a friend asks me how I am, it sometimes feels exhausting to be the positive person. And the hiding of the harder feelings like anger, sadness, and fear seems to sometimes come from a place of shame. And I am done with that. In the spiritual world, this showing of harder emotions, especially anger, seems to be somewhat discouraged. I'm confused about how to balance the real need to be genuine about how I feel out in the world with the other voices that tell me to be positive and stay positive. What do you think of that?
I think there's
Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm so glad she wrote it in. And I responded on Facebook, and the first thing I said was that it tends to be like answering this question tends to be at the heart of why we do this show. That how do we be fully human, basically? Why is that such a tricky process, it seems, to live? And yet, as these things go, typing out a response is not exactly the most rich and nuanced way to communicate about something. And so I sent my message to her, and I'm so glad we get to do a whole episode on it, because you and I talking, before we got recording, there's so much more to say. Essentially, I had just pointed out the ways that she had already answered the question for herself. When you say that it's exhausting, then there's a kind of fatiguing role playing going on. When you say, I like to be, and I'm using you universally, not just towards this individual person, for all of us, when we say, I like to be around positive people, is that true if we're talking about this kind of role playing? And yet, right? Like it being super authentic and always sharing whatever emotion is up can also get tricky. And like you were saying, particularly this time of year, we have these desires, like I desire to, feel really grateful for everything that I have. I desire to feel really joyful with my family and my friends. I desire to really appreciate everything. And even if that weren't the case, even if it weren't holiday season and I didn't have these particular desires, it isn't so straightforward to as like whatever you feel, just express it, because so much of this stuff is an inside job, like where we get to notice what we're feeling and welcome it, and then walk that internal journey of like, what's really up with me? What's really true for me? So all of that is to say, there is a lot to say about this question. And I'm trying to think of like what the most useful thread in all of that to tug might be to get the party started.
I think we could say, if we just put kind of a container around it, an umbrella around it, and listening to you, there's one part that's the inside path, right? The inner path. Mm-hmm. How do we relate to ourselves when we're having these different emotions? How do we relate to the emotions, to the identities we can face, like people pleaser, the I want to be the good one? How do we relate to the expectations we should have on what a good person would be and how grateful we should be? So we have this sort of internal exploration. And then we have this other part, which is how do we be in relationship with people? So if I am feeling grief stricken and my friend asks me, how are you? When and where do I share that? Mm-hmm. What is the appropriate time? If I show up at a holiday dinner with friends and family and I'm feeling really angry from something that happened in my adolescence that's unlocking from my SOAS, is that the moment that I unveil it? That I am honest to it. So I think we have these two different aspects that we're all grappling with around it. It's how do I relate to myself when I'm having these experiences one could label as not positive that I don't want to have. And then the second is how and when do I bring that up and out into the world? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that a place to begin too, for all of us in our own lives, is the place that you and I always like to begin, which is giving ourselves permission to be human beings who have multiple dimensions and ways of being, and we have good days and bad days, and there's just quite a lot more mystery than we ever want to admit about why those things happen. We can't always pinpoint. And so we have to begin sort of with permission. And really that permission is just permission to notice, permission to notice I feel sad today, or I feel like I'm in a funk, or I feel tired, or I feel that I want to be the positive one. I want to be the grateful one, and I can't. Because without the permission to even notice that, we wind up, digging really fatiguing holes for ourselves. And that means that we can't relate, and we don't wind up developing really meaningful relationships in our lives and connections to others.
Yeah, it's so problematic because we all know how good it feels to be positive, right? Like when we're in that flow and we're optimistic or blissful or grateful, or even when we're around people who are in that state and we get that contagious bit of energy around them, it can feel so nourishing and rich. But we've sort of come to this point where we're so biased towards that sensation that we forget about the necessity and beauty and exquisiteness of other states of being. Like we did a whole episode on grief, and we spoke about how grief is directly in relationship to praise. It's directly in relationship to love. I mean, I don't want to say grief is what makes us human, but it's such a rich part of this human experience that we open our hearts so much, even though we know at some point we're going to lose everything. That's so profound. It's so deep. It's so lovely. And we all know these moments where we've been in the pits of despair. We've been on our knees. We've experienced broken hearts, or sadness, and all of these emotions that we would somehow deem as less worthy societally or less welcome. And yet they broke us through. They split us open. They exposed us to a whole different dimension. I remember when my ex-husband and I first knew that this wasn't going to work. It was sort of a realization we had that probably preceded our breakup for about a year or so. But something happened and my heart was just struck with grief. We just knew, And oh my God, it ached so bad. Felt like the way I'm such a kinesthetic person. So it felt like my breastbone was cracked open, And at that same moment as this really bone deep aching was happening, I felt so alive. It was like I noticed the water differently and the moon differently and the smells differently. I mean, I literally can still recall how alive and on I felt, how present I felt. And we forget that all of these emotions, all of these experiences are part of the human fabric because they're meant to be, right? There's something for us within them. They are for us to experience the multidimensionality of this life, to find compassion, to find presence, to be aware. And so even within those states, there can be so much exquisite beauty that it makes you want to just shed a tear for the profundity of our lives. And so I think one of the dilemmas that we face is that both culturally and personally, we can have such a bias towards the quote unquote positive emotions that we forget that we add value, both in our own exploration of life, but to the world through having these other feelings.
And I would even say that our bias culturally towards the positive emotions and being the positive person has really kind of put a stake in the heart of genuine positivity. we don't experience genuine positivity so much because it's the age of the curated self. You know, people are broadcasting a performance of positivity because we all got the memo. You know, we got the memo that the good ones are positive and optimistic and working on themselves and self-improving and wow. And so, and we're surrounded because of social media with people who are getting very adept because we're all picking up on cues from one another at like how to broadcast being the positive one. And so it's this surface layer of fake positivity, and genuine positivity is such a beautiful thing, but it's a very deep, you know, it's a very visceral emotion, genuine positivity, genuine joy and delight and love. And like, I would even say adoration, like that kind of where you just like move towards something and you're like, we don't get as much of it. It's this funny thing. It's like chasing the tiger's tail, right? Because we don't get to have the depthful version of real positivity when someone's really experiencing it and bringing that to the world instead of performing it. It's like we're hungry for it. And so we try and perform it harder or be with people who perform it harder. And then we can feel how it falls short. We can feel how it's empty. And so like the hunger just keeps building. It's a funny thing, you know, so positivity is a gorgeous thing when it's a genuine emotion, you know, when that's what's true in the moment, when that's really coming forward, when it's a role that we're playing because we feel like we're supposed to, in order to get love, in order to earn our right to exist. It's actually this very sad thing. And I think we've all had the experience, or I would say most of us have multiple times where we've been around somebody who's trying to cover whatever their genuine emotion is because they got the memo. Their grief, their anger, their sadness, their despair is not welcome here in this world. And so they're trying to cover it with a veneer of fake positivity. And that's a very unpleasant interaction to have.
Oh, it's so interesting. That was beautifully said. I remember my dad used to say things like, when people ask you how you are, you know, they don't really want to know. You know, you just put on a happy face and you say everything's good, kind of a thing. And it's such a broken part of our society that, of course, to some degree it's true, but it's not coming from a place of health. It's coming from a place where people feel too weak and incapable to tolerate the genuine depths of human experience, of what it means to be human. It's like we were listening to a podcast with Carolyn Mace, and she was talking about how people don't watch the news. And oh boy, did this get her heated, right? She was like on fire about this. And, you know, I really understood it in the moment that she was saying it, because she's like, you know, I'm going to paraphrase badly, but ultimately we're getting weaker. You know, we think that we're getting stronger in our spiritual practices, but if we can't even tolerate what's happening in the world around us, like it's genuinely happening, we should have the capacity to be with it and tolerate it. That's a problem. We're turning away from everything because it has quote unquote negative vibes or bad vibes. But this is a part of the human reality in this moment in time, and likely always, certainly before, and who knows, maybe to come. And I thought that was very interesting as someone who myself has to be very careful around what I expose myself to. Less and less, more I do it out of preference than need. But I did think it was very interesting because even in these simple exchanges, if on Instagram I write a deep post about some of the physical illness I've been dealing with, it is certainly less popular than if I'm like, I love myself now. End of sentence, period.
I know. Forever and ever. Self-love.
Right. And I get it. You know why? Is because we want hope. And that genuine state of positivity you were referencing, it seems to be difficult for us humans.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a modern dilemma or an always dilemma. I can only speak to what I can observe in myself and in the world around me. Because, I'm going to just sort of differentiate, even though there is no real difference, but for the sake of conversation, we have positive moments. There's a moment where I'm just watching the sunset and I'm moved and how beautiful, or I'm listening to a human in a emote something that's really true about themselves and I'm touched. And there's these moments where I'm just broken open in gratitude. So there's this kind of moment by moment experience of these positive states of being. And then there's this deeper way that people can relate to life that has the genuine positivity as part of it, sort of a genuine relationship to life that feels easeful, that feels open. And I'm wondering if it feels optimistic, and I'm weighing it out in my head or not, because some people can be very realistic and some people can be ultimately optimistic, the way, let's say, a Matt Kahn would talk, very optimistic relationship to life. So there's these different aspects, and to have that genuine relationship, the latter one that I mentioned, where you are just open and in love with the reality of life and this existence in this universe. We're not taught it. We're often not exposed to it. Many of us are still fumbling our way through it as we're so inundated with the stressors and belief systems of the material reality that I think we start grasping at that moment to moment positivity. But the moment to moment being more of a feeling tone or more of an embodied state, it has a transience to it, the same way as the weather does, the same way as our body fluctuates and our hormones cycle. There's like rhythms to it. So if we keep chasing that state as if that state is the ultimate way of being, of course, we have to start forcing something. We have to start efforting something. Dare we say, even at some point, possibly faking something, because it is an unattainable state if we're speaking towards permanence.
It gets me thinking, like, what is the soil that positivity grows out of? Like, what are the fundamental ingredients for genuine positivity? Because I was thinking about that, the same talk you just referenced by Caroline Myss, and some of the things that she pointed to culturally, right? That we are more sealed off. We are more individualistic. We contribute less and care less about contributing to, say, civic discourse. Like, I don't go to town hall to hear the meetings about stuff that's going to affect my actual community. What are they going to do about the new middle school building? And what are they talking about the low income housing development down the road? And like, what's actually going on? Like, we don't really participate in those things. And I feel like in a funny way, maybe we look at what are the precursors to genuine positivity. And I think they're things like genuineness for starters, genuine intimacy, connection to one another, like all these things that our modern lives are really missing. We've developed so many tools that make it easy for us to be more sealed off. Like, I could stay in my house for the next year and I could have Amazon deliver me everything I need. I could Skype with some people here and there so I don't feel lonely. Like, it's weird, right? Like, never before in human history has that even been an option. Mm-hmm. That like food and people would just arrive by what I do on my technology. And it doesn't require that I have to participate in my community at all. And so I don't get any of that like actual humanness, basic things like, or even just thinking about the interconnectedness of things. Like, if you've never bothered to try and I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but like, if you think about growing some of your food, you learn a lot about what it takes for food to exist. And that, you know, if you are going to try and only live off your own food and you live in New England like I do, you've got kind of a big task and you have to really think ahead because, you know, February gets cold, nothing grows, you know, like all this stuff.
And you would sure be grateful when something did.
Right. You know, so it's like we don't have the soil for genuine positivity because we don't have the interconnectedness. I feel like maybe that's what we're dealing with, is how easy it is for us to not have a lived experience of our interconnectedness.
This is an interesting thread for me. It makes me think about this documentary I had seen called The Lost Boys of Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen it?
No, I had a friend who worked with that organization for a while.
Oh, wow.
So I'm familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful documentary and it was about refugees, and we had granted refugee status to a number of people of Sudan, and the documentary followed, I believe it was 5. But one of the things they said that was so interesting, I mean, these men had a chance to come to America from refugee camps, right? So you imagine that being a fairly unpleasant way to live in a refugee camp. And they were depressed and desperate to go back. They said this is the loneliest society they have ever encountered. They were like, I couldn't even go up to my neighbors and ask them for a cup of milk without people wondering why I was wandering up to their property and, you know, what it is I was going to do to them. And I think connection is a really good thing to point to because, you know, I often think about it as connection to self, like genuine self, deep self, connection to others, you know, our friends, our family, our communities, our global people, our world, our animals, our plants, you know, and connection to life, you know, God, universe, source, energy, light, you know. And on so many levels, we are disconnected. And wow, this is probably its own topic in and of itself of what it means to feel disconnected from our ecosystem. But I think there's a couple of things we can point to. One is a kind of extraneous perhaps, but it came up with what you were saying and I just have to say it. When you were talking about living with the land, I was listening to a pagan teacher. Her name is Starhawk. And she was talking about how she spent many, many years just meditating, you know, outside. She'd even meditate on the earth, you know, just sit outside and close her eyes and meditate. And then she got this message at one point, like, hello, you're not actually in relationship with the earth. Like you're in relationship with a concept of the earth that's coming through your meditation. Just sit and watch how rosemary grows.
Oh, I love it.
Right?
Yeah, I love that.
And I was like, word, you know, duh. There's this way that, especially because of our modern lives, we're already disconnected from that, right? So perhaps in more traditional practices, you might spend 4 hours meditating, but you were still going to spend 6 hours in actual relationship with people, with animals, with plants, with the stars, with the moon. But in our modern lives, where we have so little time for that, it's a beautiful thing to get on your cushion and be with the stillness. And I'm certainly not saying don't do that. But there's this way that we forget that we still need to find a way to be in relationship to the actual unfolding of aliveness in this world, that there's so much to be gained. There's so much that is about right relationship, you know, there in order to open up these states of being, these senses of genuine positivity. So that's the sort of tangent I want to bring in. But if we were to talk about connection as being one of these elements of the soil, and we think about connection to ourselves and connection to our fellow people, we can see right away how feeling as if we must have a certain state of emotion in order to maintain connection, we can see how that is a problem. Because right away, as soon as we experience something different, it puts us out of connection to ourselves and to others. It's almost like having a misaligned bone. You know, we're already now going to create a distortion.
Yeah.
And if you have a misaligned bone and your skeleton is hiking to the left, you're going to start to form muscle imbalances. You're going to walk differently. And all of these things are going to go out of their proper relationship. And I think just starting there, that this cultural and personal desire to forego connection to ourselves and, of course, genuine intimacy with others that arises when we're honest and real and raw, that is part of the misalignment that then leads us away from feeling states of genuine positivity.
Then I might be sending us afield. We'll see.
It's just like that today.
It is just like that today. But because I'm having the investigation about this, an inquiry about this as we talk, and I'm kind of trying to do a little detective work here. Like why is it hard to feel genuine positivity, genuine delight, genuine gratitude? And we're talking about some of that, like this disconnection, modern life enabling that disconnection tremendously. And I feel like if I could point to the one infection that we could all have some influence over as individuals instead of feeling impotent about these larger forces, it's the busyness infection, like what but like we are all so busy, and like we all drank the Kool-Aid of busyness with mother's milk, right? And so and then we have these complex lives. We have these lives that require quite a lot of income to come in for basic needs, which didn't always used to be the case. So it's like, I'm busy. But then it gets valued culturally. Like you're doing a good job if you seem super busy. And we just lose track of ourselves. And then we're piling complexity and complexity and complexity, and we're busy and we're busy and busy. If I'm so fucking busy getting done what I really, truly believe I need to get done in order to survive, I can't have an experience of my life. I can't feel gratitude for my gorgeous son sitting next to me on the couch, after he just lit the Christmas candles I put out, because I'm just like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's on the to-do list? And for sure, this has been a pattern for me and continues to be, although much less so. But I had it come back recently just because this month is a compressed month, right? And I've got family coming to visit this month, and my son has to get his tonsils out this month. So there's a surgery and recovery involved. So there's like all this extra stuff. And I started feeling the busy infection again, which I haven't really actually felt in many months. And I was just like, ooh, this feels awful. And I cannot enjoy my life when I'm believing the busy story. And when we went to Dharma Ocean, I remember after our first week in Crestone, I don't know whether I got this message in my individual group because we were split into smaller groups, or if it was something that was said to all of us by the teachers there, Tammy and Jake, after that first week. But it was like the most important thing when you go home in this time period between week 1 and week 2, which was 5 months. The most important thing is simplify your life. I think it was actually a part of the curriculum that we got for that 5-month period in between. And I took that to heart, and I realized there was a lot that I could cut out of my schedule and my busyness obsession. And I am very much conditioned to believe that if I'm busy, I'm a good person, so it's challenging for me to spot those places that could go that are over complex and could be simpler. And it's been 2 years now where I just keep emptying out extra things and getting less and less busy. And there is a direct relationship between the ability to enjoy your life and the amount of busyness that you have. And so if you can go in and harvest out unnecessary busyness and complexity, which I guarantee you we all have, it starts to change your relationship to your life pretty dramatically.
Sure. It makes it way easier and more accessible to be present and not to be exhausted, quite frankly, so that you can be in simple states of joy. I guess part of what we're pointing at, so through what we're saying, obviously our bias is be human, How you feel is how you feel. Don't contort it. Don't distort it. And what we're saying is it's so easy to do that because we can have an attachment that that's a good way to be, that that's the healthy way to be, that that's the successful way to be. We can also have identities built around it, like the busy person or the people pleaser or the good one. And so, of course, what we're confronting within ourselves, never mind the societal pressure, what we're confronting just within ourselves is this strong pull to be a certain way in order to be happy, in order to be successful, in order to have love. So we can see all of that, and you can hear our biases. Don't do that. That has led us astray. Always has, always will. So then we can start to look at the question of like, what do we do? How do we interact with this? So I think some of what you were just saying, Brooke, that I want to highlight is part of allowing yourself to recognize your genuine experience is because it opens up an investigation. Genuinely, I have the heartfelt desire to be grateful. I have the heartfelt desire to feel joyful. I have the heartfelt desire to have gratitude and love and all of these different states of being. And I don't. And so then it opens up an investigation. What is inhibiting the flow of that? Is it because your life is too busy? Is it because you're exhausted? Is it because you're in the wrong relationship, the wrong job? Is it because your inner critic is constantly hammering at you? Is it because you have a sickness that you haven't yet had an opportunity to address that's creating a hormonal imbalance? As soon as we get real and we get honest about what's happening, the invitation arises from life to start to see, and then we can follow a thread towards these genuine states of positivity that can arise, which again is not static. It's more like bedrock. And then there are these kind of movable states on top of it. So I think that's part of what's interesting. Now, I think where I get tripped up, and this is part of why the question intrigued me, was, okay, neurobiologically, I know the goodness that lies within shifting your brain towards states of being like gratitude and compassion. And I always liked those two in particular. You can't just shift towards happiness. To me, that's bullshit. You're happy or you're not.
Right.
You can't do that. But you can evoke states of compassion just by breathing into your heart. You really can. And you can evoke states of gratitude if you just start really simple, like I have gratitude that I can breathe, right? So I always understood neurobiologically there was some benefit to that. And then we can see how captivating it can be when you're in psychology or when you're in self-exploration to keep spinning around the trauma, to keep focusing on the lack, to focus on what you don't have or what you're doing wrong, and to miss the opportunity to just breathe in these simple states of goodness that are right there and available to us. So recently, I was listening to a talk with Matt Kahn. I think it was The Alchemy of Transformation is what it was called. And he was talking about gratitude. And he was just saying, gratitude's ultimately the alchemical agent. He started with love, right? So if any of you listen to Matt Kahn, let me just break it down just in case, because I think there's an importance in the step-by-step. He started with whatever arises, love that. So the invitation with that message is, if grief arises, you turn towards it with love. If sadness arises, you turn towards it with love. You don't reject it and judge it and say it should be different and it should be positive. So he started there. And then the practice is just get into a state of gratitude. You're going to shift your energy. You're going to shift your state of being. You're going to realign with the universe. And then things will flow better. Now, I get that. Rationally. I get that neurobiologically, yet I don't find it so easy in practice without a sort of potential bypass happening. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if now that's part of just my tendency as a sort of depth psychologist, spiritual, embodied person. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, as you're describing it, because I haven't listened to that Matt Kahn talk where he focuses on gratitude. And so for me, it felt like there was a step missed in terms of me actually being able to feel it in my own experience. Because first of all, being able to turn towards whatever arises and love it, big fucking deal. Very uncommon in our world, but I've had some time with that, exploring it as a lived experience because I'm familiar with Matt's work and that's part of what I've been up to this year. So the gratitude piece, I missed a step where I can actually feel it. Like you said, conceptually, sure. Yes. Great. But
yeah, well, part of what he was even saying is, for example, even if you don't feel grateful at the moment, let's say, right now everything's shit and I don't feel grateful. Mm-hmm. You could just move towards, I wish I felt grateful. And that even that is a step towards shifting. Mm-hmm. And so go there. Now, we don't even have to focus on Matt Kahn's style, but just rather this basic fundamental idea we get, societally, some spiritually, some neurobiologically, that you don't need to focus on the belief systems or the hard stuff or the conditioning, but rather shift your energy. Shift your energy and it will shift your neurobiology. Then you'll be in parasympathetic joy. So what do we say towards that?
Well, the place that we always get so fucking tripped up in Western culture is how predisposed we are to shame. Because as soon as I'm saying I should feel grateful or I want to feel grateful, and we're not like turning towards it with love can soften things quite a bit, but it can soften things completely. But if I'm just always trying to shift towards gratitude, the wiring of shame, which is so thick in all of us, is going to say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I feel shame? I should feel a different way than I do. And I really feel like shame is that thing that just drags all of us down into the muck and keeps us from ever making any progress. So anything that sets off the shame activation, I'm like, if I actually feel it in myself, it's just like, ugh, as soon as it's telling me, what are you doing wrong? And I'm really differentiating shame from things like remorse, guilt, regret, totally different. I'm talking about something completely different. Shame is basically, there's something fundamentally wrong with what I am, like annihilation levels of fundamental wrongness that we just all have in us so much. So as soon as I'm saying I should be feeling grateful and I don't know, there's a step missing because it sets me down the shame road and so I haven't unhooked in the direction of an actual energetic change to where I'm actually feeling some softening, actually feeling some gratitude.
Sure. I mean, maybe in a reality where, let's say, for example, fear arises and you can turn towards it with genuine love and you can meet it, and you can soften, then maybe the next step is this easy unfolding of gratitude for this moment, for life,
Yeah.
So of course it could be that it flows like that and it would make more sense. And I'm with you. I think probably at the heart of our very way of being in the world and our way of talking, when we say be human, is don't be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed of the mess, of the turbulence, of the ups and the downs, of what it means to be human. Don't be ashamed, because that's the infectious agent. Mm-hmm. Forget busy.
Right. Busy's a little layer on top. Yeah. A little tiny little sprinkle on the cake of shame.
Sure. But it's probably shame driving the busyness if we were to
For
really
sure.
look at the pathology reports, right? So I think that's it. And I think we're always going to go for anything that creates more shame. And I think it is part of why healing is tricky, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think it's part of why getting the genuine states of positivity and love has a trickiness to it that for some reason we all think it shouldn't. We think it should be simpler. But I think part of the delicacy of working with ourselves and even of us supporting others when we coach people or when we are coached is this shame infection is so easily triggered. And once shame grabs a hold of the wiring and starts to drive the bus, you can guarantee we're going in the wrong direction.
Right. Healing can't happen.
Healing can't happen. And we just go farther and farther down the pretend road, the fake it, the be happy. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes social media is a really funny human creation. You get to see so much because this like fake positivity you were talking about. I mean, sometimes I read people's things and they're plenty uplifting. And then you'll find out like a year or so, they're like, I've been dealing with this horrible chronic illness that I didn't mention anything about.
Yeah.
And, they don't have to, of course, everything's very personal, but I'm like, what? There's no way all of those things you were saying were the only thing you were experiencing. But this is how we are driven, right? As you're saying, to kind of the shame infection will move us towards any hint of humanness that I don't have this all worked out yet, makes it seem like I don't have something to offer, like I'm not a being of value. And of course, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. So I think, this may wind up being a little bit of a long episode, and I think maybe that should be okay if you're okay with it, Brooke. But I'd love to just bring it towards, okay, so let's imagine we're all down for this pact that we're going to be human together. And we're not going to deny to ourselves what we're feeling. And we're going to allow it to be an investigation into what's actually happening for us. And we're going to allow it to be an invitation to love ourselves in that state. Let's imagine all bliss and grit. We're on for it. Now imagine we're in this unfolding process and we show up at a table full of people.
Family type people.
Could be family, even friends, even like our listener wrote when she said, like, I want to genuinely say to a friend, I'm not in a good state when a friend asks. Now, we all know there's certain moments where you and I, for example, Brooke, talking, of course, I'm just going to tell you when I'm shitty. We have that relationship. But it is going to be time dependent. I'm not going to do it right before August gets his tonsil surgery, for example. I'm going to be very thoughtful about that. But what happens when you're at a holiday, when you're around your family who doesn't have the capacity to hear all that? They're just unskillful. God bless them. Then how do we navigate all of this?
I love that you just lobbed the ball over to my court. Like I have an answer for that.
I know. Well, it's perfect. I just set you up wonderfully.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I think we should leave it on at least exploring what are some of the ways. So I'm trying to think about, instead of coming up with some, toolkit answer, I'm trying to think about, what's actually going on for me, like as I prepare for the holidays and family visiting and that kind of thing. I mentioned it before, but I'll just underline it because I have just found for me it has such a direct relationship. The more I let myself get eaten by busy, the less I am able to enjoy and appreciate and show up for my life. I can't enjoy my time with my loved ones. I don't do the things that would be totally delightful. Like if I decide that everyone has to have the perfect gift and I need to like be out shopping and then I'm not going to do something that's like super really fun and intimate for me, like my son and I making the, cinnamon rolls together because we both like to bake, and that's like a fun treatsy that we don't make the rest of the year. And that's just genuinely delightful. So, and that makes me feel positive, and we share intimacy and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, in moments where I've been around the table recently with family members, and let's say there's a lot of, busy and heavy and agitation and that kind of thing, it definitely doesn't turn into a showdown, right? Where I'm like calling people on their shit. It doesn't seem like that's what's required in that moment, because that's not what anyone has signed up for. Nobody's at the family dinner table so that they can have their shit called out, and they don't need that from me. They don't need me to Sherpa them to seeing the light. What I've had to do in some of the more agitated moments, agitated meaning the general air of everyone is like busy and stressed and like huffing and puffing. And it feels like one of those, like everyone's kind of on the edge here, where this might wind up being an unpleasant gathering. This is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound obtuse, but it's what I'm actually doing and what's actually helping. And it's so easy to fucking use this as a bypass, but I'm going to say it anyway. What I will do is when I notice I'm getting caught in the swirl of agitation, and for me, that means because I'm a codependent person, I start trying to manipulate the energies of everyone in a way where everyone can like understand each other and get along. When I catch myself doing that, I will first go to the silence. Now, it's very easy to use that as a bypass where I'm checking out from everyone. But instead, what it feels like is, so when I say go to the silence, what I mean is right now people are listening to my words. And we're all used to hearing the sounds, and the sounds exist. And the example that I give people in my meditation classes a lot, because I'm an artist, is we talk in drawings about positive space and negative space. So there's a white piece of paper, and then you grab an ink brush and you start, painting on the piece of paper. The negative space is the white piece of paper. The positive space is the ink mark you've just made. The sounds are the positive space, and there's still the negative space. I just stopped talking. There it was. There's the quiet that the sounds come out of. So it's not woo-woo and mystical. It's just that there's both. There's sound and quiet. And when somebody's talking, there is also this quiet that's happening that the sounds are emerging out of. And I don't need to make this complicated, but there's just this way where when I connect with it, it feels like my body softens. So people can also just do this in a somatic way. Feel your weight in the chair. Feel the seat that you're in. Notice your breath. These are all just ways to come to awareness, right? So whatever works for you, if you have a meditation practice, come to awareness. What I notice then is that the thing that emerges to the foreground, instead of me being in controller mode, is love and affection. When I genuinely connect with awareness, love and affection is much more available. Not perfect, but it's like suddenly it's available and I can have more affection for everyone exactly as they are. It's not forced. It's not me making an announcement or saying anything or trying to cheer people up. It's really just this very basic way of regarding people from a place of awareness feels different. Now, I wish that was like a cuter tool. But it's just the thing that I'm actually using.
I think at an earlier time in my process with my family, what you were just describing would be much harder for me to get to and to have access to that love and affection. Though now I think that would be
that's why I wish I had something else to say, because I can
some
see
people are right here.
Yeah,
so I'm going to go back and remember when I wasn't right here, because same with my family now. In fact, they trigger me very little. And that's like a month by month getting better and better basis, so this has been 40 something years in the making, where they trigger me less and less. And I can, like you, access these different states just by coming into awareness and coming into quiet. But there were phases in my own truth process, right? So, when I'm in my 20s, I think I had the easiest childhood in the world, even though I have memories of it not at all being easy. But I think, on a relative spectrum, I wasn't locked into a closet and beaten and raped. And so I had the easiest childhood in the world, nothing very interesting. So in my 30s, when I really started going to therapy and exploring, it was the first time I was being honest that some of the things that happened were actually excruciatingly painful and terrifying to my system, right? So I was coming to truth with myself. Now, as I was doing that, all of a sudden, I couldn't be around my parents that much, especially my father at that moment. He was really holding a lot of it. So at that stage, there were a few choices because it was so raw. It was like finally acknowledging terror that I had kind of pushed away as inappropriate or like put in the too scary box, right? So at those moments, if anyone's there, one option is you decide that it's in right alignment not to see your family for the holiday. Sometimes that happens, and that's the way you go. And it's in better alignment because you'll go, you'll explode, you'll cry, you'll vent. You just kind of know the road that it will go down, and it's for everyone's highest good. You just bow out somehow. Sometimes you'll strategize. You'll only go for a couple of hours. Maybe you're going to invite your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your best friend to come with you as a buffer. People like that can be great buffers. You come up with a clever logistical scenario that feels the most easeful that you can manage, recognizing we are imperfect. At that moment, someone might have said to me, don't go to your families. And I'd be like, are you fucking kidding? Of course I have to go to my families. I am deeply codependent. So even that strategy, as wise as it may be, was not available to me. Perhaps it is to all of you listening. But what I may have figured out is that I was only going to go for a few hours. And then I invented my ex-husband's family holiday that I had to go to. So the first is just get really honest about what you can tolerate, how much you can show up without pouring all of your pain into the space, how kind you can be to yourself, and you can set that up. The next thing I think I began to work with was in psychology, we talk about dissociation. So dissociation is this unconscious movement away from your own emotions, kind of packing it away. You may also think of it as an unconscious movement towards a role. So that's sort of what you were saying, Brooke, like historically, you may sit at a table with your family and loved ones and go into people-pleasing mode or harmony maker mode or fix-it mode. You don't even realize you've landed there. Or you're gossiping again, the way you hate doing. We kind of unconsciously cut away from our feelings and move into patterns of behavior. But there is a term in psychology called disidentification, which is a conscious moving away from a state of being. So for example, if I was about to teach a class when I was a college professor, and I was feeling kind of real and raw over some trauma, I was not going to bring that into the classroom. Inappropriate, not the right time, not the right place. So I would recognize the emotion. I would see it. I wouldn't push it away, but I would recognize I'm more than that emotion, more than that memory, more than that trauma. And I would step into a different aspect of self and go on with teaching. Does that make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we could do the same thing with our family. And that's sort of how I've always treated it. The funny thing over the years is all the pain I've had with loved ones, family members, friends, lovers, whatever the case may be, I would say 90% of it, I worked it out inside of myself.
Yeah, that's the thing. You really do
Right?
learn more and more and more that everything's an inside job, which isn't to say, make that an excuse to muzzle yourself. But I would say,
Yeah, you have to go with your own direct experience of when it's appropriate for you to process it with somebody or express it to somebody. I mean, I'm such a loner that your way may not be my way, right? But so much of it is processed internally because it is internal, because it's subjective. My parents, for me, growing up in my childhood home created a lot of pain. And at the same time, they did a really good job in other ways. They were completely unskillful. They really didn't know any better. And they did great compared to their parents, right? So now if I just bring everything I went through out into the dinner table, onto their laps, there's a way it can't be held by them because it's not their experience of reality. And they don't have those skills. If they had those skills, they probably wouldn't have had that pain to begin with. So for me, a lot of the processing has happened on my own. But what that required to show up then at the dinner table was I either opted out of certain things. Holidays, no, but I saw them less and I talked on the phone with them less while it was healing. Nothing is forever, right? So there's phases and I stayed true to the phase. The second thing is we can show up and we can recognize we're more than any feeling state and we can just allow it all to exist. We could be smart. We could be mindful about it. But I think that generally that's sort of how I've interacted with not trying to pretend I'm happy and be positive, but also not bringing all of my emotions into every moment so that when my aunt asked me on Christmas Eve, how are you? I burst out crying over all of my pain that I'm sick or over all of my childhood grief.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to bring in one last piece about a way to experience a little more gratitude, which involves time travel. So, great. Yes.
Let's ground it in something.
Why not ground it really in time travel? It's so grounding. I had an experience at one point this year at night, totally normal night, sitting on my couch in my living room. Same thing that happens every night. My son's asleep in his room. My dog's on the couch with me. Most boring thing in the world. And all of a sudden, gets a little mystical, but we can utilize this to access gratitude. I have since it happened. All of a sudden, I felt as if I were, let's say, my 80-year-old self who had been gifted an opportunity to come back and be my 42-year-old self and live that totally ordinary moment over again. So if you could imagine you're 80 and you're looking through your photo album, if those still exist, which they won't. You're looking through photographs and you see a picture. Totally oh my God, that was my living room when I was 42. I remember that couch. Oh my God, my dog. I remember his soft fur and the sound of my son's breathing down the hall in the room. He's asleep. And it's just normal. But if you could really relive that as your 80-year-old self, how much you would cherish the fiber weave of the couch, the smell of the candle on the kitchen table. Like everything would be so cherished. And for whatever reason, I was gifted this experience as that actual experience where I felt like my 80-year-old self got to come into my body and live that. And so we're not all going to have that descend into us, right? Like we're not all going to have that kind of experience, but we can play with that. You know, if I were my 80-year-old self and I got to relive just this totally ordinary moment, what would I appreciate? And that's just a more straightforward gratitude tool, but it can land us in the present moment, which we don't all have a ton of facility with. So it's a nice tool for like getting here, really being here. My messy coffee table with the tea mug that I need to get rid of suddenly becomes like so sweet from that perspective.
Yeah. I love that. There is something about loss that invites us into gratitude, you know, like because I'd been divorced, I remember that not all relationships necessarily last forever. And somehow that makes me feel really grateful in the moment. I mean, I must be such an existentialist at heart.
Yes, you are.
I think about people dying and then I feel grateful, you know.
I can reflect like you are.
Yours is a little sweeter, but I like it. And somehow isn't just a piece of it when you get into that gratitude, because just listening to that exercise you were sharing that you've been using, it makes me just want to cry. Like, why is gratitude so heart-opening? It feels almost overwhelming and bursting. And maybe this is part of the dilemma with genuine positivity, is that you have to let go of your contained self. You can't hold on to the containment and be in all of these beautiful states of awe and wonder and actual gratitude and big, big, big love and big, big, big bliss. It is a breaking open of all of the containers. And it can take a little bit, I think, before we feel ready for that.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Just go on over to the website and scroll down and you'll see each episode's separate post. We put the resources right in there. You can also come play with us on Instagram and Facebook, where we're having some super fun conversations with y'all. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. As we said in the intro, you can subscribe on the website, blissandgrit.com, if you want to be first notified about the goodies that we have brewing for the community in January. If you want to support the show, we always appreciate if you write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or even on our Facebook page. We also have some merchandise happening. You can get that on the website at blissandgrit.com if you want to get some swag like a t-shirt or mug for yourself, or if it's the perfect gift for someone in your family. Huge gratitude to all of you who have already written reviews. Can't tell you how touching it is for us to read those things. It really makes a difference. It helps people find the show, and it kind of fuels us to keep going. So thank you for that, and we'll be back next week.